the Maine Forest Service, of which at that time in 1987 I became the director of the Maine Forest Service, submitted 3 bills to the legislature, which ultimately were heard in this room. The incredible wisdom at the time, I believe, and still believe, was that this committee sent all 3 bills back out the door and the Commissioner of Conservation was charged with bringing all 3 parties, the state, the environmental community, and the industry together, locked up to decide what in these bills were important, what could be decided without debate inside this room, and what couldn't be decided. Well, 99.9% of the Forest Practices Act, as we have it, was decided outside of this room. You remember Gro Flatabo sat here, Tim Glidden sat here and staffed this committee, and both of them worked with this committee hour after hour after hour of work session to devise the Maine Forest Practices Act as it is. At that time, there was an unwritten agreement, if you will, to let this thing go for 5 years to see how it worked, and then we'll come back and analyze it and see what happens. In less than 3 years, there were bills being submitted to the Maine legislature to change the act. The legislature sent those bills back out with directions to the Maine Forest Service to go out and do a survey on the effectiveness and the implementation of the Forest Practices Act, and which they did. In 1995, last spring, another Forest Practices Act change bill came in and was opposed by the industry. At that time, there was the committee down the hall. At that time, there were discussions about that if this bill wasn't passed, that there certainly would be a clear-cut referendum, and you have the history of forest policy in Maine in a nutshell. We are here because there is a Green Party clear-cut referendum that has been offered to the state. If it was only that, some of us wouldn't be probably as uptight and in a knot as I am at this minute. One of the things that you asked me to do was to remind you or acquaint you with the issue of basal area as a measure of forest stands. You reminded me that international paper some time ago had come in and done that for you. Most of you know me well enough that it's a good thing that they're still across the street, because I wouldn't get them again to describe to you the technical application of basal area. Dave Manley is with me as part of this presentation with the information that you asked for, and I would give the floor to him, if that's okay with the chair. Okay. Okay.
My name is Dave Manley. I'm a forester with International Paper. Those of you who were part of the discussion the last time around and saw this presentation probably remember that given Pat wanted to deal with IT, but he's now with a different group of different part of the company. It kind of fell to me and Pat. I did call him to get the details on what he presented, and told me that when he presented it, it worked out wonderfully. Everybody applauded it. Everybody was really pleased when it was done. So he told me that if that's not the case this time around, it's not the material. It's to present it. So,
Dave, can you kind of push that so that as many people as possible can see it?
Sure.
And there's probably as many legislators out here in the audience and other interested folks as there are people sitting around the hush.
I think I'll put it sideways here. I'll leave that one right there. It doesn't fit anyways. I guess first of all,
too much time. I should just hold it, Dave, and then kind of.
when we get to it, I'll make sure everybody sees it.
Need. I'll hold the one you need.
You're going to be my
I will hold
card
it.
person.
I'm the cover boy here. poster boy.
I guess that,
Yeah.
you know, my objective, and when we're done, make sure you hold me to it, is that you understand what basal area is, why it's used as a measure of stocking in forestry, and how we measure it. The why, I guess, is it's an issue of, it's a measure that takes into consideration both stem size and stem count on a given acre of land. If I tell you that there are 200 stems per acre on a particular acre, but you have no idea the relative size of those stems, it's hard for you to gauge or judge, you know, how well stocked or overstocked or understocked is that stand. Likewise, if I tell you that the average stand diameter or stem diameter on a particular tract of land is 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches, not knowing how many stems, you again kind of struggle as to know what is the standpoint. Basal area takes into consideration both those measures, comes up with a measure of overall stand stocking that you can equate to full stocking, intermediate stocking. That is, every particular acre of land has an inherent maximum threshold of stocking. But that acre, because of constraints with nutrients, soil, water, can't really produce more biomass than that particular stocking. And basal area is a measure that helps you quantify that and understand that irregardless of the state of, or the stem size that exists on a particular acre. That's why we use it. How we use it, John, if you could kind of show that. How we measure it, basal area is a square foot measure. It's a measure of surface area of an individual bowl or stem taken. If you cut that stem off at 4.5 feet above the ground and look down upon the stump that was left, it's the surface area of that individual stem. And this diagram here depicts the fact that we're taking a stem at a given height all the time, 4.5 feet, which is this DBH you hear reference, diameter of breast height, that's 4.5 feet. And we're always measuring the diameter of that stem at that point and calculating the surface area or the cross-sectional area of that stem. That's the basal area of that particular tree. Pi r squared is the math that calculates that area. It becomes a matter then of calculating it for all of the stems on a particular acre of land. I want to show a couple of diagrams or a couple of visual aids here so that you can kind of get a feel for, when you start talking specific numbers, what that relates to in actual tree dimensions. Because again, we're talking a square foot measure, but we're all talking about something that's round or generally round in shape. This might be the cookie that was cut out of a 6-inch tree at 4.5 feet. It's just a 6-inch diameter disc. That, if you do the math, the pi r squared, that calculates out to 2/10 of a square foot. So this is 2/10 the square foot of basal area, 1/6 inch tree. This is simply a 1 square foot, 12 by 12. And I guess the issue we've got to try to I want to make sure you understand is that while certainly that's 1 square foot, when you're talking about basal area, you've got within this 1 square foot, you've got 6 6-inch stems to make up 1 square foot. I mean, excuse me, 5. I've got 5 depicted on here, but there's obviously these gaps in between these round areas. Remember, if you add up these gaps,
Okay, that makes the fifth.
that's the 5th one. Remember, a 6-inch stem is 2/10. So 5 is 1 square foot. This, again, assume this is a section of a tree taken out at 4.5 feet breast height. This is about 12 inches diameter. Again, simply doing the math, 8/10 of a square foot of basal area. So basal area varies with the stem size, and then it becomes a function of calculating the number of stems per acre to calculate the basal area on a per acre basis. I think before we get into kind of the, I guess, the visual aspects of basal area, are there any questions in terms of how it's calculated? The simple math, where it's calculated at every stem, 4.5 feet. It's strictly a cross-sectional area of the stem. One of the, I think this one will fit, John. One of the issues, certainly one of the questions that I hear a lot is the variation that can exist around this measure of basal area. That particular stands can look significantly different but still have the same amount of basal area in them, and how can that be, and how do we deal with that? You know, when we're talking visual cues, you're trying to consolidate it into a quantifiable, measurable standard. It's a simple fact, going back to the issue of basal area as a function of stem size and number of stems on the acre. And as those variables change, the visible is to scale. That's that 30 square feet of basal area depicted in a square rectangular shape. This is, you know, the discussion of one sheet of plywood. That's one sheet of plywood in relation to this acre. And you can see the issue. Certainly you can take every one of these stems and you can take all of the square footage, and that's what it adds up to. But in terms of the physical orientation on the acre, it's significantly different than a sheet of plywood located on that acre of land. Any questions about basal area? How we calculate it? What it is?
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
7 Islands was asked here to discuss the bill and how we would interpret it as it's written. While there have been several interpretations floating around, one from the state, certainly the one I'm going to give you, there depends on interpretation, depends on whether you quote and unquote liberally interpret this bill or conservatively interpret this bill. One of the issues has been the issue of the definition of a commercial species. Some would say that, please, some would say in the beginning that it was meant to ensure that there were saw logs left in the residual stands and other parts of the bill. Some would say that that's too tight in interpretation, and that it really means that if the species group, i.e. if spruce, is capable of growing a saw log someplace in this habitat, then therefore a spruce left at on the stand, regardless of condition, whether it's a cull tree or unmerchantable or unsaleable because of condition, counts towards the basal area, which you just read about restrictions. There's others of us who have read the bill as almost being verbatim from Forest Service documents that requires an 8-foot log in it, or some other criteria for log. It's written, I think, in 5C in your paper. The literature that was sent around that accompanied the referendum stuff referred to this bill as ensuring that a quality stand remained after harvest. Quality stand implies quality stems. Quality stems imply logs. I'm not a rocket scientist. but it sure leads me to believe that the interpretation of this thing should be read as including logs. Having said that, you also have some information that says that though it does imply in the definition that it has a log requirement, and it says that implications are that the Green Party thought that that would be the case when harvesting was done. The third conclusion was that a log is not required in the stems that are left in the trees, in the forest. Having said all that, what I've just done for you today is going through step by step down that language as you have it with our interpretation, and then at the end I'm going to show you where we are today in terms of 100% of our harvest, what a liberal interpretation of the Act would do to our harvest, and what a conservative interpretation of this language would do to our harvest. When I say 100% of our harvest is a sustainable harvest by all.
Just with 1 second, John.
Yes, sir.
Is there anyone in the room that doesn't have the papers that show the act?
You have it memorized by now. Being sustainable, for the a flat sustainable rate extended into the long term. I said before, Seven Islands is modeled 200 years out. By going through outside third-party certification and showing you the seal, what I'm saying to you is that we are harvesting today, 1995, at sustainable levels. Outside parties say that we are harvesting in 1995 at sustainable levels. Having said that, so that the numbers I give you are changes off sustainable numbers that we operate on today, so that there's a basis. There's no argument in my mind whether we're almost sustainable or a little bit sustainable. We are sustainable. So the numbers that I show you will be from that calculation. One of these pages will be a discussion about each section. You can read the section, the underline, as if it was like it is on your paper. We interpret the definition as meaning that it applies to trees of commercial value in Maine. These are easily determined by the current Forest Practices Act because they are listed. Each stem of any species must now contain or be capable of containing, with further growth, 1 12-foot log or 2 contiguous 8-foot logs. That's in the definition on your table. The definition says, which now or progressively as they grow will contain. And we emphasize will, but the law says, or that language says will. The antithesis, that the group species as groups should be ones capable of producing saw logs under the right conditions somewhere in Maine, but not necessarily on that harvest site, renders the definition moot according to the Green Party published intent. That's the pamphlets that were out. This more liberal interpretation would allow all saw logs to be harvested from any site as long as minimal residual basal areas of cull trees of species considered to be commercial were left on site, allowing high grading or cut the best, leave the rest. This is totally unethical in the Green Party's view. So we would have a bit of confusion interpreting that definition as written as not meaning requiring a log in every tree that's left in the woods, or potential for logs. The Green Party's pamphlet, Stop the Clear Cutting, states in part, all the while, and in a well-managed stand, a larger and increasingly better quality stand remains in place. Off the literature that goes with this, this is achieved through techniques such as selective cutting and removing the poor quality and low-value trees to allow the best in the stand to prosper. That's off the pamphlet. One of the cumulative intents of this referendum is to effectively outlaw all harvesting systems except selective cutting, small groups less than 1/2 acre, because you'll see later that it says openings no bigger in the forest than 1/2 acre. A 1/2 acre, I don't know how big this room is, but an acre is 208 by 208. Half of that would be a 200 by 100, okay? To support this intent and associate improvement in individual tree quality, the Green Party attaches to selective cutting, the definition must be read in the most restrictive way, and that's how we interpret it. Until there's a legal interpretation of this definition, no one's going to positively know where, in fact, it is. Seven Islands has taken this thing seriously, and that's what we interpret it. Now, what's going to happen here is that you will hear that, no, that's not right. The intent is the lesser of the two interpretations. Well, that's today. If this thing were ever to pass, I would be running for the lesser definition as fast as I can, and those who would want it passed would be heading for the most conservative definition that they could have. So it's a definition shell game right now until there's a legal opinion in one form or another about the definition. Clear cutting means any, and I believe this is the current definition of clear cut. It's out of this still. Clear cutting means any timber harvesting on a forested site which results in an average residual basal area of all trees greater than 4.5 inches in diameter. This definition applies to forested stands or forested sites. There is no definition given for the term stand. Are the two different? We think it's somewhat confusing. It disregards the present minimum of 5 acres for a forested stand. Right now, a forested stand as a group is measured down to 5 acres. A clear cut, a cut which is smaller than 5 acres is not a clear cut. It's not measurable in terms of the definitions that we have now. It implies an acre by acre assessment of basal area. Okay, so that every stand, everywhere, is an acre in size measured by basal area. The stand, I won't read the definitions, they're right on your thing. The definition is unclear as to what constitutes the minimum size of a forest stand. Again, this is important. We're determining residual stand requirements. Since the definition provides for inclusion of minor areas less than 5 acres in size, would it seem to default then to a 10 plus or minus acre stand size? We don't know for sure. Okay?
John, do you want any questions for clarification as we go along?
Caveat on that is that, as you know, sometimes I may technically not be able to do exactly what you're asking me. I have Mike Dan with me, who's the main, our head forester, that if there's a technical thing that I can't deal with, I will certainly default to my forester if I would.
So do you prefer them if we go or wait?
It's up to the committee. I'm here at your...
How do you people want to ask if we go along?
I'd like to hear the presentation.
Like to hear the presentation.
He's clarified most of my questions.
So, be sure you write them down.
Forest management stands, notwithstanding Section 5. Now understand that all of this language is in the LURC statutes, is in the Land Use Regulation Commission statutes. It applies to the unorganized territory of the state only. All of this language dealing with forest practices is not under the purview at this time of the Maine Forest Service, but in the unorganized territory. So when it says notwithstanding Section 5, it's notwithstanding the land use regulations, definitions, and standards for what in the general management districts is referred to as method and manner of cutting, removing trees, etc., etc., etc. So this overrides the zoning for general management in the land use regulation or the unorganized territories, overrides the shoreland zone that you're all familiar with, which is 40% in a 10-year removal. This is all going to be restrictive and override that stuff. Okay? And the enforcement ultimately will be in the mechanisms of other than or in the statutes of the Land Use Regulation Commission and not the Maine Forest Service. Foresters would no longer have the ability to work out cooperative agreements. We have huge agreements over big areas with the IF&W to work out deer wintering areas on a greater area than what's there. These things would override our ability to do that because it prescribes one way to manage the forest and that's it. We have land use, it will override the definition in Section 5 of the Land Use Regulation Commission, and we find that problematic. Here in the clear-cutting referendum is the clear-cutting bill, 12A. Clear-cutting is prohibited. All the rest of this stuff deals with prescriptions and management for other management areas in the forest, not whether you clear-cut or not. There's the Clear-Cut Act right there. Yes, sir.
Question about that in reference to that. Do you interpret that to mean, I know this bill deals with unorganized territories, but would you interpret that to mean that any type of, whether it's separate and apart from the forestry issue, but any type of development that might be proposed in that area would restrict, would basically make that impossible because that clear cutting to build a building, for example, or a golf course, or whatever the case might be, would effectively say that you can't do that? Would you interpret it in that manner?
I would interpret this that if there's any place in the world where the law of unintended consequences applies, it's this. Okay? There are just, you cannot prescribe one way to do things. There's all kinds of things. We're looking at it from a forestry perspective, how that is interpreted from other kinds of uses in the unorganized territories, including farming and everything else, field clearing, I have no idea. Okay? Unintended consequences, if it doesn't say in here that it's allowed, one would have to assume.
Then your best guess is yes.
My best guess is I haven't analyzed it for that. It outlaws shelterwood harvesting since all merchantable trees 4.5 inches DBH cannot be removed from the site regardless of the amount or size of the trees less than 4.5 DBH, diameter breast height. The current B density mature softwood stands which have received the initial stage, and what that means is, I'm going to show you some interpretations of that in drawings later. But oftentimes in the forests of Maine, you open the forest by going in and cutting some of the trees. That lets the sunlight in. Anybody that's been in the woods know that if you let sunlight in to the forest floor, the regeneration, which is young, the seeds and all that, begin to regenerate, and that begins to grow. You begin a shelterwood system where you open the forest by once. You may or may not take off the overstory the next time in, but you might, depending on the conditions of the soil, the wind throw, and everything else. We manage our forest for natural regeneration. Shelterwood harvesting is probably the most critical tool that we have because we can regenerate the forest before we remove it. Regenerate the forest before we remove it, and that's an unacceptable practice under these systems. The overstory should be harvested in one operation. Spruce fir, especially fir, a shallow-rooted species due to prone to wind throw. To attempt to remove the overstory in more than one stage can result in wind throw. We do it in certain places where the soils are deep and the trees are strong. Where the soil's shallow and you regenerate it, you've got to pay attention to what you're doing and how do you treat it. The referendum in 12B, in a 15-year period, timber harvesting operations may not result in the removal of more than 1/3 of the volume on any acre. And you just write that down, mark it anywhere you want. That becomes a critical pivot point in this whole thing. This is a labyrinth of little rules with perhaps all the best intentions, but one little rule violates another little rule, violates another little rule, and pretty soon you've gone round and round and you violated yourself. I don't like doing that. I just thought that up.
So you've been violating.
I feel like it. Geez, it's right there, but right behind me.
John, I have no interest in violating you. I want you to know that.
And like I said before, with this one-third removal in a 15-year period is more restrictive than shoreland zoning, which all of you know about in your towns, whether it's organized or unorganized. This whole thing becomes more restrictive across the entire unorganized territory.
Does the one-third removal rule, in your opinion, effectively override the basal area issue? The basal area says you can have 90 square feet or 65 square feet or whatever the number is. This could effectively raise that number. Who knows what?
Let's say you have to leave it. Let's say you have to leave 90 basal area. In order to take one-third, you've got to start with a stand that has 138 square feet. Okay? And you convert that to cords. Some forester. Convert that to cords, it's around 34, 35 cords before you start. Okay? On that acre. So things, we're talking about perfect world forestry here. We just dropped the ramp in 1620 in Maine, maybe, and that's where we think the forest is. This is a long, convoluted one. It provides some of the conundrums that are in here. Your issue of having to take a third down to 90 is another one of those things which come back around. I'm not going to go through this part. It's on your desk. But I will talk about it. If this thing considers only commercial stems as to be able to contribute to the residual basal area, if the interpretation is that stems of commercial species must currently or prospectively meet saw log specifications, and this is the conservative side, and I'm saying that right up front, until I'm convinced otherwise, legally or otherwise, it's my responsibility to look at it this way. Full stock stands with less than required basal area saw log trees could not be harvested. The only option is let them grow and hope that they will recruit enough stems of saw log quality to allow harvest. You can read it. Very few medium or low B and C density stands have the percent of commercial saw log trees required to meet the basal area. We're talking 3 times as many as on that chart right there. For softwood, we're talking, I forget, 75 for mixed wood, which is, yeah,
75
for mixed wood, right? And 60 for hardwood. So it's twice as many for hardwood, 3 times as many as on that chart. As the stand that you have to leave, interpreted conservatively, all of them must have log quality. Well, what did you harvest off that thing to keep some hardwood mills and softwood saw log mills and other things going? I'm not sure yet. It ignores all stems less than 1 inch DBH. It ignores the fact that a site can be fully occupied by commercial species which are 1 inch or less DBH, and grow spruce fir, sugar maple, and still grow to a forest. But it stops us at this idyllic plateau somewhere that makes us do forestry up here somewhere. This section, read alone and out of context for the rest of the document, seems to allow overstory removals, since S in the formula could be 100%, and that would be no requirement for tea trees. But the previous section, 12B, go back to 12B, 15-year period, 1/3 of the volume only, begins to restrict what you can do in this other section. Each one of these things in a perfect world is okay. Wrapped together, it's a conundrum. I'm glad I'm not enforcing this baby, and I haven't seen a fiscal note on enforcement yet either. After timber harvest operation is completed, a healthy, well-distributed stand of trees must remain with minimal damage to individual trees. The diversity of the tree species, tree size, and tree age classes of the stand trees remaining in the stand must be maintained to the maximum extent possible. In other words, when you're done, whatever you leave must mimic what you started with. And you can take a third of whatever was there out of it. Well, this ignores a whole lot of reality in Maine, in that the way trees grow sometimes is one kind of species grows in the shade, one grows in the sun. The overstory could be completely opposite of the understory, spruce fir under popple, for instance. And how do you manage that forest so that you always have popple there, which is short-lived species, to grow spruce and fir from underneath it, if you can only harvest something which leaves some mirror image of what was already there in the first place? Forestry is not a static business. And cardboard cutouts, maybe. So, so people driving by can, make a judgment on this thing. This totally ignores the natural succession which occurs in the Maine's forest. You can read it. It would force you to keep stands of early successional species, poplar and white birch, as just that. This outlaws the elimination of low-valued species in favor of high-valued ones, because some species, sugar maple, yellow birch, over something like red maple or some other species that are mixed in there, you can remove the stuff that isn't used in sawmills and whatnot for biomass and other things and leave a quality thing, but this says you can't. You can't do that. You have to leave tree species, age, and the other one there, size, distribution to the maximum extent possible. Now some people say, we don't mean that. Well, you guys are legislators. If it's written, someone meant it. Conundrum number 12E. Timber harvesting operations may not create single openings in the forest canopy.
Mr. Chairman, a question if you please. This gentleman here speaks about this is acceptable or it isn't acceptable to us, it isn't acceptable to us. It is, according to answer, it is. Who is us?
Mr. Chairman asked me as a land manager to come in and describe the effects from our perspective, Seven Islands Land Company perspective, on the effects of this bill on our forest land management, sir.
Yeah, but,
that's us.
But who is us? I mean,
Seven Islands Land Management Company. John Cashwell, President, Seven Islands Land Management Company.
you mean you're a private organization?
Yes, sir, I am.
No, you work on budgets from organizers from
100% of the land that Seven Islands Land Company manages is in the unorganized territory. It's 980,000 some odd acres. We manage it for as a non-industrial forest land manager. Okay? Privately owned. I'm not sure what the question is, now that I've given you an answer.
I would like to study this thing all 3 weeks, then I'll tell you what it is. I haven't been around too long, but I have been around long enough to watch forest grow some. And you'd be surprised how much you can learn by just watching something. Yeah.
Okay, sir, thank you. What we're here for today is to get your perspective from this gentleman's point of view. Thank you.
Slash that is larger than 3 inches in diameter must be disposed of so that no part of the slash extends more than 4 feet above the ground. We interpret it as prohibits all whole tree harvesting, even when tops and limbs are utilized for chips or taken back in the woods. I think that workers' compensation insurers would tell you that topping and limbing is one of the hard deals in the woods that some of you know here, leading to causes of lost time accidents. What and how this thing applies is one of those things. Some say you can take the trees to the landing and use the tops. Some say all trees harvested must be delimbed at or near the cutting site. Is the cutting site the stump, or is the cutting site the 10 acres you're harvesting? Is the cutting site, I don't know. Okay? Basically, that runs through the language itself. Seven Islands has a management plan that's that thick. The management plan is an operational plan that's in context of decades, applies 5 years at a time. Part of that management plan is to establish priorities for our foresters to make operations and land management plans for harvesting. I'm going to take the priorities that we did that we have for softwood, and I'm going to show you how this applies to the priorities that we set for our foresters in our management plan.
John, before you do that, is there any question dealing strictly with what John has told us about the referendum as it is?
Question here. John, under what you've described here, what part or what percentage of your loss did you deal with offering?
Can I defer
Okay.
that? We have a chart, a graph to show that in a few minutes.
Thank you.
I have a question, John.
Yes, sir.
Back to where you were dealing, I believe, with section 612D, and it's the last sentence that says maximum extent possible. How do you interpret? I didn't quite understand what you said, how you interpret it.
We're not sure how to interpret that. The numbers that we are going to give you a little later does not interpret that, because that indeed is one of the mysteries in this thing, is how exactly do you do that. It's described as, well, the intent is, but I don't know what the intent is. We did not use that particular, I'm sorry, I've lost the paper. We did not interpret that in our calculations of reduction in harvest, because we just don't know how to apply it or how we could do it.
One more question, John.
Yes, sir?
Going down to F, it says that slice that is larger than 3 inches in diameter must be disposed of so that no part of the slice is within 4 feet above the ground. Does this mean that the harvester is just either run over it with his skidder, or is just to take a saw and go through and saw
Chop it down? Boys, I don't know. I really don't.
Is there anyone else that has questions, clarifications?
I'm not going to get into the debate because I'm listening here and I'll be here next week, but I do want to make one thing clear. In your remarks, you did an excellent job, John. I mean, I don't agree with most of it, but the question is that it is not the Green Party that is running this initiative. It's the Ban Clear Cutting campaign. It's composed of a consortium of citizens, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, whoever. And that needs to be made clear. That was the only error that I saw that was really glaring that was bothering me. Okay.
I'd like to say this, when they went around, I understand, when they ran around, they asked, are you against clear cutting? Are you against clear cutting? If you are against clear cutting, sign this petition. Now, as I look at this, clear cutting is one small paragraph. Because I don't think that the people that have had these petitions out are really honest with the people that they were talking to.
The stand? I was just going to keep going. I was going to either move closer to the door or keep going.
Just keep going.
Stand priority list for S, which is softwood, and SH, which is softwood with hardwood. Our management plan calls for stand priorities where net growth, and this is quoted out of it, where net growth is near zero, dead or dying. These stands have a significant component which is declining. Over mature fir, fir is not a long-lived tree as compared to spruce. Over mature fir stands that are blowing over, stands where there are significant health problems, and over mature cedar stands are examples. The principal silvicultural objective is to improve the stand by growth by removing the declining component, retaining adequate stocking levels and vertical diversity when possible. Under this scenario, because of that 1/3, and this doesn't even, none of these examples have 2 sections in it, okay? None of them have taken into consideration the definition that requires log trees. None of them take in the definition of the question that you asked me on the where to the greatest extent possible. We ignored both of those, and we're just applying in a mature stand of 40% fir, 60% spruce. We would like to remove the old, slower growing fir. It would be illegal for 2 reasons. More than 1/3 of the trees would be removed, and the diversity of tree species would not be retained to the maximum. I'm contradicting myself. The diversity of the tree species would not be retained to the maximum extent. In other words, we're taking out fir trees which are susceptible to budworm, which get older younger, like me now, and they're not the long-lived trees that their spruce cousins are. To do this and remove them to leave a healthy fir, spruce forest, we cannot do it because of the composition of being 40% fir, and we cannot do it because we're going to take the fir and leave spruce. We violate the law by not leaving enough fir in the stand. That's priority number 1. You want to go out and have partial cut the forest before they die or fall over. Thinning stands, second priority. Target stands that are S3A, that's forestry terminology for softwood of a certain height and density. SH, which is softwood hardwood, stands are currently overstocked, they're crowded. The silvicultural objective is to lower the stocking to optimum levels so that the trees are free to grow, good rings, saw logs, all that stuff. Regeneration is not an issue in this stand. Residual trees must be young and respond to thinning. Spruce will respond to thinning at most any age. There's a window of opportunity here to take out some trees and let the others free to grow. It would be illegal to remove the red maple as part of the thinning because the diversity of the tree species, to the maximum extent possible, would not be retained. This is the kind of unintended consequences written in one single prescription in the law. Our third priority is to treat overstories, retarding young S and SH stands. Again, you can drive in the North Woods up there and you can see a lot of the budworm has removed a lot of the softwood. You see hardwood stands, overstory. We cannot remove the overstory on those stands as a shelterwood removal because they're older or anything else, because we do not, one, we remove more than 1/3 because the trees at the bottom don't count in the DBH and the basal area counts, and 2, the diversity of the species would not be retained. And you've seen these kinds of stands all over the place.
In your earlier presentation you made, the earlier part of your presentation, you made a reference to trees smaller than 1 inch in diameter not being counted in the basal area. Did I understand that correctly? Somebody did?
I said it.
Okay. In a typical spruce fir stand, how old would that tree be at a 1 inch DBH? I know.
Excuse me?
Guesstimate.
They can be many years old or quite young. It depends on the stand and where they came from, how crowded they are. You can take and cut a tree, a spruce fir tree this big around that's been sunlight's been blocked from it, and it can be 20 or 30. You can have a more open stand and the same thing and have 10, 15 rings in it, and a lot more. A spruce and a fir will sit dormant in a shade condition for years and years and years. It'll grow a little bit like the fingerprint on your thumb. When sunlight is allowed to it, they'll grow. That's why you open the story once, overstory, let the understory grow, get up to a height so that they're well established, but you won't break them off when you go in to get the overstory, and take off the overstory, and you've got a new forest, years old. So it all depends. So it could be a long time or whatever. Our fourth priority at Seven Islands, right out of our book, is healthy S and SH4A, which are the older, vigorous, well-managed or density with high beach.
Oklahoma bombing suspect Timothy McVeigh has a new lawyer. The two originally appointed to his case